What's up, everyone? For those that follow the vlog, my son Quinn was born on January 17th, so I haven't been able to play too much poker recently. It's been about 2 weeks, but I'm here at Champions today to fire the Winter Series, so hopefully that goes well, and hoping to play some more cash in the near future. I'll keep you guys updated. This vlog was filmed at Champions here in Houston, and it was a 5-5-10 game. I hope that you guys enjoy. The session starts out with a hijack open by Outlaw to 30. Mike calls in the cutoff, and I 3-bet in the small blind with pocket nines to $175. Only Mike continues, and we go heads up to the flop with the pot at $395. The flop is the Queen of Diamonds, 6 of Diamonds, 6 of Hearts. I obviously don't love the Queen, as Queen X combos are kind of the top of his range, as he's often going to be 4-betting hands like Ace King, but continuing with a call with hands like Ace Queen, and he should be calling at least Queen 10 suited plus. But overall, pretty happy with this flop. My opponent's going to miss the board a lot, and I have a relatively strong pocket pair. I check with the intention of calling, and he continues for a very small size of $80. I expect him to be continuing here with a lot of weaker pocket pairs. He's going to have some Queen X, obviously, but I also expect him to have some backdoors and some flush draws. I think pocket nines with the diamonds specifically is much happier to make this call, as I do block some of the flushes from coming in, and most of his flush draws are going to be in the Broadway region or ace high region. I continue with the call. We go to the turn with the pot at $555. The turn is the 5 of clubs. Realistically, doesn't change much unless he has exactly pocket fives. I check, and he continues again for a pretty small size of $175. I think at this point I would expect most of his Queen X and 6X to probably be using large sizes. It's definitely possible he has a weaker Queen X combo though. In general, if my opponent is barreling here with complete air, it's going to be hands like Broadways as well. So a hand like pocket nines is a very strong candidate to bluff catch with. I make the call, and we go to the river with the pot at $905. The river is the 4 of spades. I check with the intention of probably just calling down. My opponent checks back. I show pocket nines. He says I'm good, and I scoop this pot. Matt opens it up to $60 from under the gun. I look down at 6-5 suited in the +1 position. This is a hand that I definitely don't want to be calling here, as I'm often going to be squeezed from behind by other players. And although it does play reasonably well multi-way, it's a hand that often makes the second best hand. My pairs become much weaker the more players that are in the hand. I do think I want to be continuing with this hand at a low frequency, but playing it as a 3-bet. I think I have fold equity versus Matt's under the gun range, and 6-5 suited plays reasonably well against the under the gun range that often has overpairs and broadways. I 3-bet to $180, and he continues with a call. We go heads up to the flop with the pot at $400. The flop is the 2 of spades, 7 of hearts, 7 of diamonds. This is a board I'm going to be c-betting at a high frequency for a large size. I'm going to have a nut advantage with all these stronger overpairs that my opponent would have been 4-betting. It's also pretty unlikely that either of us has a 7x combo in our range. My specific combo has the backdoor straight and the backdoor flush, so I can often pick up equity on the turn as well. I continue for $225, and Matt continues with a call. I expect Matt to be continuing here with all of his pocket pairs. He's going to be continuing with all of his stronger ace-x, and he's going to be continuing with overcards that have backdoors. So something like King Queen of Spades. All of his weaker broadways are probably going to be folding, as well as his weaker ace-x combos. We go to the turn with the pot at $850. The turn is the Queen of Hearts. Overall, this is going to be a pretty good card for my range. My opponent realistically only has hands like Ace Queen and King Queen with the backdoor flush, while I have a lot of the Queen X combos that decide to just c-bet at a high frequency on the flop. It's also a card that a lot of his pocket pairs really hate, as now there's an overcard. I do think he's going to be continuing at a high frequency with his pocket pairs versus a second barrel, and my specific hand often wants to just be checking back if I haven't picked up any equity. So he checks, and I do check back. We go to the river, which is the Ace of Hearts. This is an amazing card for my range. I'm going to be checking back some Ace King as well as some weaker Ace-X combos. Although I barrel a lot of my flushes, I also have a few flushes in my range. If I did check a Queen X combo here, I think I could also go for value. When my opponent checks, I think he's very weighted towards pocket pairs under the Queen X. His top pair and better is often going to be leading here on the river, and his check means he often has showdown value. I decided to bluff with my 6 high, as I do think it applies a lot of pressure on his weaker pocket pairs. He tanks for a long time, and ultimately he does make the fold, and I pick up this pot. I open up Ace Queen offsuit, and it folds around to the small blind and the big blind, who both make the call. We go 3 ways to the flop with the pot at $130. The flop is the 8 of spades, Queen of Hearts, 8 of clubs. Obviously great for me with top pair, top kicker. It checks to me, and I continue with a small bet of $40. Definitely could be going bigger here, but I think it's fine either way, especially multi-way. Often going to be using smaller sizes when I'm multi-way and on paired boards. This allows my opponents to continue with a lot of their weaker pocket pairs, all of their weaker Queen X, and all of their straight draws. I expect a lot of their 8x combos to be raising versus the small size as well. The small blind makes the call, and so does the big blind. Not expecting to get 2 calls here very often, but it's definitely possible for me to still be ahead, as my opponents could have many worse queen x combos, as well as those draws. The turn is the 3 of spades. If ace queen is still ahead, I'm very far ahead at this point. It checks to me, and I decide to pot control. If my opponent has a straight draw, they only have 4 outs. I can put in a pretty sizable bet on the river versus all the queen x combos. And when both players call, I think it is more likely they have an 8x combo, and I minimize some of the damage. To my stack. The river is the 10 of clubs. The queen 10 and jack 9 get there. But I think I'm still in a pretty good spot, especially when it checks to me again. At this point, I definitely want to be going for value. I continue for $175, hoping to get called by a weaker queen x combo or a weaker 10x combo, as well as possibly a very sticky pocket pair. Mike quickly folds, and Jay Lee raises it to $375. There's a chance that I'm good here, but I think it is likely that he has a hand that's now beating me. Like I said, the queen 10 and the jack 9 have come in. It's also possible that he had a 8x combo that he decided to slow play. I think it's a pretty difficult spot for him to have a natural bluff, as I don't expect his 10x combos that were gut shots to turn their hand into a bluff. And he's used a pretty small sizing. I think I beat here, and I do find the fold. He's kind enough to flash the 8, so I'm glad I made a pretty good fold here. Against the same opponent's hand, as Mike opens it up from middle position to $30, Jay Lee calls in the hijack, and I look down at king-queen suited on the button. This is definitely a hand I want to be 3-betting at a high frequency, but I think call is perfectly fine. Plays relatively well multi-way. I'm in position, and Mike is a somewhat shorter stack, so I think things can get a little precarious if I 3-bet. The duck felt flats behind in the straddle, and we have a Houston heads up as we go 4 ways to the flop with the pot at $130. The flop is the 10 of clubs, 9 of diamonds, 7 of hearts. It checks to Jay Lee, and he leads out for $100. I'm not thrilled to see this large bet, but I think with a backdoor straight, a backdoor flush, and overcards, as well as being in position, I do want to continue. I think my hand is perfectly fine to play as a call or a raise. I think when he's betting large into the field, he's often going to have a pretty strong range here, though. And I don't expect to have too much fold equity. Being in position, I decide to just make the call. Both the Dockefelt and Mike fold, and we go heads up to the turn with the pot at $330. The turn is the ace of diamonds, giving me the nut flush draw to go along with my gut shot. I also think that the ace is a card that doesn't interact with my opponent too much. He definitely can have a hand like ace 10, but outside of that, it really shouldn't change much. He does continue for $250 using a large size once again. I did contemplate raising here, but I think a lot of his range is going to be 2 pair and sets here. Realistically, I only have fold equity versus something like queen jack, or possibly something like 8-7. Those hands that are a straight draw plus a pair, but even those are probably continuing at a high frequency. I do think that I have enough equity, especially with implied odds, to continue here in position, so I elect to call. We go to the river with the pot at $830, and the river is the 8 of spades, bringing a 4 straight on board. And my opponent once again continues to lead out for a large size, this time overbetting the pot with a size of $950. It's definitely a weird spot because I think if my opponent did have a set or 2 pair, it's very unlikely that they would be using this size. So for the most part, he's saying he has a straight. His straight combos are realistically only queen jack and jack 10, maybe ace jack at a low frequency. Queen jack makes the most sense. I'm obviously blocking that though. I really did contemplate going all in as I blocked the nut straight, and my opponent's line doesn't make too much sense, but my shove wouldn't be for a very large size as I'd be making it less than 2.5x times his bet. There's also not a lot of natural bluffs though, and ultimately I did make the fold. Talking to him later, it sounds like he did have queen jack, which makes a lot of sense to play this way, which he clearly would not be folding. We ended up breaking up into 2 tables as quite a few other players wanted to join the game. I ended up still being at the same table as Jay Lee, who I once again play a hand against. I open up 8-6 of diamonds to $75 from the big blind, and he elects to call from the double straddle. We go to the flop, which is the 7 of clubs, 6 of hearts, 5 of hearts, giving me the open-ender and middle pair. Blind versus blind, out of position, I'm going to be playing this as a high-frequency check, with the intentions of either to check call or check raise. I check, and he decides to bet $50. He's going to be betting out here with a lot of straight draws, either gut shots or open-enders. He's going to have a lot of weaker single pair hands that want protection and value, and he's also going to have some flush draws. Probably just has some air too, like overcards, so something like jack 10, but I'm not positive. This time I decided to continue with just a call. We go to the turn, which is the 9 of hearts. A card that I both love and hate. It gives me the straight, but it brings a flush in. I once again check and float, and he decides to bet $100. Versus the small size, I probably do want to be raising at some frequency and applying pressure on the single heart combos, as well as his 1 pair combos. Although to be fair, I think a lot of his one pair combos have either a flush draw or a straight draw. By raising, I also get to charge his two pair combos. But overall, I don't think my hand gains too much value as there's a 4 straight on the board as well as a possible flush. And if he does have a hand that's essentially complete air, then I want to give him the opportunity to barrel on the river. I decide to continue with a call. The river is unfortunately the 10 of hearts, bringing a 4th heart on the board. At this point, I just want to get to showdown. I'm still beating his 2 pair combos and worse. I don't think it's a board that he's going to bluff at a very high frequency, and it's hard for him to have too many natural bluffs. I check and he checks behind. And unfortunately, the river was horrendous for our hand as he flips over 4-3 offsuit with the 4 of hearts. So he did flop the straight. We caught up on the turn, and he ended up hitting the flush on the river. I think I could have got quite a bit of value on the river if it wasn't a heart, but not much I can do to control the run out. Jay Lee opens up this one in the cutoff to $30. It folds around to me in the straddle. I look down at King 10 offsuit. This is a hand I'm going to mix 3 betting with at some frequency. I want to be using a somewhat polar range from the big blind. That being said, I think call is the standard play, and that's what I like to do this time. We go to the flop, which is king high, giving me top pair and backdoor flush draw. I check to Jay Lee, and he continues for a small size of $25. I think king 10 can raise at some frequency here versus a cutoff range, especially that's using a small size. I expect Jay Lee to be betting this board at a very high frequency. King 10 would probably be the edge of my value range, but I think call is perfectly fine. This time I throw in the $25 chip, and we go to the turn, which is the 2 of spades. Overall, I think this is going to favor me pretty heavily. I'm going to have a lot more 2 pair than my opponent. I'm going to have more straights. It's unlikely he's going to have the weaker 2 pair combos, and he's going to have a much lower frequency of the king x 2 pair combos. But I do think this is a board that he's still going to be barreling at a highish frequency, as his flush draws probably barrel, and he's going to pick up a lot of straight draws with his ace x combos. I could also see him betting some of his pocket pairs here, especially pocket 6s, pocket 5s that have the straight draw. But I think it makes sense to barrel a lot of pocket pairs here for both denial and value versus my weaker pairs. He continues for $100, and I think versus this sizing, I just have a pure call. We go to the river, which is the 2 of clubs, which is a pretty good river for my range. I'm going to have a ton more 2x than my opponent. So I'm surprised when I check and he decides to overbet for $650. When he uses this large polarized sizing, he's going to be weighted towards strong king x, pocket aces, full houses, and straights here. I think that I have a reasonable bluff catcher, as a lot of his value is going to be coming from those stronger king x combos, which I block. The 10 of hearts is probably neutral in theory. My opponent should be shutting down with a lot of their Broadway heart draws, although I don't know if this opponent is necessarily doing that. But I also don't think I want to have too many Broadway cards in my hand regardless. I'd much rather have a hand like king 5 that blocks the straights. Thought about my action for a while, and ultimately I did put in the call. I think exploitatively I can probably fold here. I don't think my opponent is probably bluffing at a high enough frequency. But I think I got in my own head and was thinking Jay Lee can't have it again. He's had it the last 3-4 times. We've been playing every pot together tonight, and he's always had it. What are the chances that he has it again? Of course, he does have it again this time, as he has pocket 3s, and he flopped the set, which turned into the full house. And this pot doesn't go my way. In this hand, I'm back to the main table. There's a $20 double straddle. I'm in the standard straddle, and there's 2 limps ahead of me. I look down at queen 10 offsuit and decide to just limp behind. I think this is a hand I'm probably going to be raising at a pretty high frequency, but I also expect my opponents to continue very often. And I don't necessarily think I have as much fold equity as I do in other situations. Outlaw in the double straddle bumps it up to $120. Both Vedant and Daka Felt call, and I decide to flick in the call as well. We go 4 ways to the flop with the pot at $485, and the flop is the 7 of clubs, jack of diamonds, queen of diamonds, giving me top pair. We check to Outlaw, and he continues for $150. When Outlaw's betting into 3 people, I expect him to either have reasonable equity or a pretty strong hand. I'm surprised to see Vedant and Daka Felt both make the call. I think it's perfectly reasonable for me to fold my hand at this point with this much action ahead of me. I definitely would be folding if I had a weaker pair. But I thought with top pair on this one of a board, I wanted to continue until at least the turn. I put in the call, and we go 4 ways to the turn with the pot at $1,085. The turn is the 9 of hearts, just increasing how wet the board is, but giving me the open ender to go along with my top pair. I think with this many players getting to the turn, there's often going to be a straight out there or 2 pair, and my queen x combo is probably not good. Depending on the sizing, I probably do call another bet though, as I do have the open ender. It does check around though, and my top pair is looking a little bit better. Outlaw could definitely still have an overpair or a stronger queen x combo. It's not surprising that the Daka Felt or Verdanth would check either, as they're going to be checking to the preflop raiser, and they see better. The river is the 6 of diamonds, bringing in a possible flush. At this point, I'm really just trying to get to showdown. It checks to me again and I check back, and thankfully outlaw checks behind. I show my queen 10 and I'm actually good here, and I scoop this $1,100 pot. Outlaw raised it with queen 8, and I'm not sure what Felt or Vedanth had, but they obviously had a somewhat weaker pair than me, or possibly a draw that didn't come in. Something like 10-9 that made a pair. Either way, I think it's a pretty good run out for me in that instance, as they're unlikely to bluff, so somehow this one worked out for me. Felt limps in the middle position, and I open up Jack 10 offsuit in the hijack to $50. Outlaw calls in the cutoff. Both the straddle and Felt call behind, and we go 4 ways to the flop with the pot at $210. The flop is the queen of hearts, 8 of hearts, king of diamonds, giving me an open ender and a backdoor flush. I think this is a board that is going to hit the Felt and outlaw's range at a pretty high frequency, but I have a pretty good bluff candidate with the Jack 10. It checks to me and I continue for $125. Outlaw calls. I expect him to primarily have king X combos. He's going to have some queen X combos, and then he could definitely have some draws here. I expect him to be 3-betting a high frequency with hands like ace jack and ace 10. He's going to have something like jack 10, maybe 10-9, although I'm not sure he's calling a gutter with multiple players behind, unless it's like 10-9 of diamonds. He's also going to have a fair amount of flush draws here. I think it's very unlikely that he has a set or 2 pair, as he raises those at a very high frequency facing a bet here. I think he's going to be folding a lot of his weaker pairs with 2 players behind. The straddle fold and Felt fold. We go to the turn, which is the 6 of diamonds. I think this is a card that I want to be using larger sizes on. I don't think overbet is the preferred size. I think it's probably closer to like 75%. I continue for $375, and my opponent once again makes the call. At this point, I think he primarily has king X combos and possibly a sicky queen X combo. I think if he did have a gut shot, he'd probably be folding. I think his draws are going to consist of stronger flush draws and hands like jack 10 as well, although both of those will be raising at some frequency here on the turn. But when he's in position, he's going to be calling a little bit more often. The river is the 6 of spades. Unfortunately, my draw doesn't come in. Probably want to be bluffing this hand at some frequency, but I think outlaw is going to hero call me very often. I'd also prefer not to have the jack of hearts, as I block more of his folding range. I decided to check back. Realistically, I'm only folding out ace high flush draws that are beating me. I could possibly fold out a chop, and obviously I also allow him to bluff if he has a hand like 10-9 of hearts or 10-9 of diamonds, but I think that's just such a small part of his range that it doesn't matter too much. I check, he does decide to check back, and unfortunately he does have the ace 2 of hearts. So he did have an ace high combo, and a bluff would have got through here, but I do like how I played the hand. It's just kind of unfortunate that he had one of the few combos that I would have folded out. Unfortunately, the session didn't go well. I lost about $2,000. I didn't play particularly well in the second half of the session. I think there was a few mental leaks, so hopefully I can fix those for next time. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you guys in a few weeks. Thanks. Bye.